Hey, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are around the world. For a lot of you in the U.S., it's evening. The question is coming in chat already. Where can you apply for the next one? Well, join our Discord, and if we do a next one soon, you can do it there. So hopefully 40 Pink Dragons can throw up the Discord link. And who's this Peter guy? Yeah. So Peter is a frequent, I'll allow my guests to introduce themselves after I give them a little preamble. Duke of Thought, who's hiding behind the black square, will be our first presenter tonight. So he's getting ready to pitch. And in the meantime, we have I hate to use the word judge, a 3-commentator panel tonight that's going to give feedback on pitches. So just a little bit about our format, our intended format tonight. We will have 4 people come on and do pitches. And we're targeting, the first pitch may be a little longer, but we're targeting, a 10-minute sort of very long elevator ride pitch. And then we'll do a little Q&A where the panelists can ask questions if they need more data. And then we'll do a little commentary and feedback touching on both the content of the pitch and meaning the presentation and the idea. We'll do both a little bit. We'll try to get through each person in about 30 minutes. The first one, again, may get a little bonus time. And the idea here is it's important to pitch well. And it's a great skill, whether or not you ever expect to try and raise money, which is what some of these will be investment pitches, or you want to sell an idea, present something to management, present something to your local club, your homeowners association. That can be a really tough pitch. Something political. All of those can be things you need to articulate. Your school board. Oh my God, do I have a story? Okay, I have to derail because my stepdaughter and my stepson are both going back to school in different districts where I live. And the first plan that came out from our school district for my stepson was that he has 6 periods a day, 1 through 6. There was so many people who wanted to go back to school, and they wanted to socially distance so much that they have to have 4 different groups, which means he was going to go into school every Wednesday afternoon for only periods 1 to 3. He would never see his period 4 to 6 teachers in person. And his back to school was half a day every week. Now that's really getting those kids back to school. So before we sort of picked our jaws up, the local school district had revised their plan to make it more rational in their idea, more useful. So the new plan is that he will go in 2 afternoons a week. One afternoon, he'll have periods 1 to 3 live. The other afternoon, he'll have periods 4 to 6 live. But because they still have the same space constraints, he'll now do this every other week. So one week, he'll go in 2 afternoons. The other week, he'll not go in at all. So back to school in Washington State is going swimmingly at the moment. That's amazing. All right. So on to my 2 panelists here. You know them both. One of them, from frequent participation in chat. Peter is known in our channel as Pentaquan. So Peter is an analyst. I don't want to mistitle him at a local venture capital firm. He can choose to reveal if he wishes. I met him in that vein, but he's going to be our financial and did you sell me, am I giving you money, senior associate. There we go. Thank you, awesome. He's a senior associate at a local venture capitalist in Seattle. He will be our am I giving you money specialist tonight, as well as advice from the VC perspective. I will play the mean executive. If anybody needs to be the Simon Cowell judge, I will try to take that role. And then, of course, you all remember Danny, who's frequently in our chat as well. Danny is the diversity Jedi at Amazon Game Studios. And so, what I'm trying to give you, and her background is as a technical program manager. So, I'm trying to make sure you have a tech and people perspective, mean executive, why are you wasting my time perspective, and a financial and VC perspective. And so, first up, well, anyway, before I go first up, Peter, Danny, would you like to add anything?
Daniel, I'll let you go first here.
Well, fine. Let's see. I only think the other thing is that I've got several decades of building both online and offline products. So I come at it from a very, how is this going to work from the customer from a technical implementation standpoint?
Great. I think additional points for me. I can just give a quick background here. Started my career on Wall Street, got fed up with the culture, and bought a one-way ticket to San Francisco. Found a early stage startup. Was number 30 that grew to a $2.4 billion company. Was getting monotonous and then went on to private equity, lost my soul for 2 years, and wanted to get back into technology in some sort of way. And I think at the time, venture was the most logical step. And I'm incredibly lucky to have not only gotten into venture, but also come back home. So that's a bit of background on me.
All right, sweet. Thank you, Peter. And yeah, I can't help memeing on GameStop and silver futures. So maybe that'll be our closing topic. Pitch me on silver futures.
And Bitcoin going up.
Wall Street gone mad. Yes. All right. So with that, hopefully Duke is there. He's been on mute the whole time. Yes, hopefully screen share will work first time. Yeah, so he's ready to go. Duke came off mute. So Duke of Thought is a longtime channel participant as well. And he would very much like to practice a pitch that's voice and slides only. So trying the handicap of what if you have to do it without video. He does have slides to share. So you should have control to share your screen, Duke. When you do that, I'll switch our view so that viewers get all of that. So you go ahead whenever you're ready. There we go.
Is it working?
Hold on. Oh, look at that. It is working. Yeah, you're all up. You've got the whole screen. I'm going to see. We're all on screen. So run with it. Water taxis in Hong Kong.
Yep. All right. So hello, everybody. My name is Duke of Thought, and today we'll be talking about water taxis in Hong Kong. The city of Hong Kong has been undergoing several redevelopment projects along its waterfront of Victoria Harbour recently in the several years in order to improve its commercial, tourist, and residential viability along these areas. However, a problem that's been noticed by my previous sponsors, Harbour Business Forum and Designing Hong Kong, with this waterfront development plan is that there's a lack of waterfront transportation to connect these different places together. Most transportation in Hong Kong is inland based, bringing people from the waterfront towards inner centers of commerce. So the solution that Harbour Business Forum and Designing Hong Kong came up with was to help develop a water taxi system on the harbor in order to connect these new locuses of commerce together. So to that end, the purpose of this presentation is to develop a set of recommendations and a business plan for a full-scale water taxi system in the city of Hong Kong, focused on Victoria Harbour. To achieve that goal, there were 4 main objectives that were identified. First, we tried to identify what type of water taxi type services already existed in the city of Hong Kong, if there were any. Second, we tried to identify locations where public infrastructure could be added in order to help support a water taxi service, such as piers and docking locations. Third, we obviously tried to determine public demand for a water taxi type service. And fourth, finally, we try to synthesize this information to develop a concrete plan that would involve all potential stakeholders, government and private, to develop a water taxi system in the city of Hong Kong. So the first step of the project that we went through was identifying current water taxi type services in the city of Hong Kong. To that end, I and 3 other people traveled to 9 different locations, as you can see here on this map, which we've pinned up in this waterfront locations in the city of Hong Kong, to see if we could identify water taxi type services. And if we did identify them, we wanted to see if we would be able to engage in these services and travel along them. The points that we've pinned in red are the locations where we were able to determine water taxi type services already existing. And for most of them, we were able to engage in commerce with these people, particularly, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but in the Sai Kung location number 5 and in the Aberdeen Park location number 9, which is on the northeast and southwest portions of the map. So in a majority of locations, water taxi type services exist and are available in Hong Kong. They just aren't identified as such or marketed very well. Water taxi type operators and services are typically divided into 3 different vehicle types: sampans, kaitos, and launches. So what we see here are sampans, and sampans are typically more flat bottom type boats. They're more private in nature and more owned by individual proprietors. And as you can see, the quality of them is a little bit below average. However, they do provide transportation services on a bargain type basis. So in Aberdeen Harbor, for example, we were able to take a short pleasure trip of around 3 minutes for a charge of around Hong Kong dollars and $7.50, which in USD translates to around $1. In Sai Kung, a sampan was willing to take us around for an hour-long trip for around $60 HKD per person, which translates to around a little less than around $8 to $10. Kaitos are more professional motorized looking vehicles, as you can see here. And again, we identified these types of ships in Sai Kung and Aberdeen Harbor. In Aberdeen Harbor, the Kaito was more of a ferry type service, which transported people back and forth from a set location, point A to point B, and charged Hong Kong 2.2 per person, which ends up being less than the value of $1, so a couple cents per trip, and took around 3 minutes. The Sai Kung trip was more of a destination trip and took around 10 minutes and Hong Kong $30 to travel to and from a beach island location. Launches proved to be the most elusive types of ships in order for us to identify and find in the city of Hong Kong. Launches typically ply the Victoria Harbour region of Hong Kong and are typically contracted out to construction companies to ferry their workers to and from waterside construction areas. Most of them are under contract and are exclusive towards construction companies and are not available for public use or general public use. Of the ones that are available for general public use, such as the Hong Tai Motorboat Company and the Ming Li Company, there are charter systems where you have to book anywhere from 1 to 2 hours to a half hour in advance. And they have mandatory minimums of around $800 Hong Kong, so $100 USD per boat to travel. And typically the limits on travel will be around from 30 minutes to an hour, depending on the cost of fuel, which varies. The next phase of our project, after identifying the existence of water taxi type services in Hong Kong, was identifying locations where new piers and construction could be added to help support the business of water taxi locations. So on this map, you can see that we've added around 5 locations where piers could be added. Most of them are focused on the hot new construction areas of West Kowloon District here and the former Kai Tak Airport, which is being redeveloped into a tourist, cruise, and pleasure center. Oops. And here are the remaining potential locations for new piers to be added. This is focused mostly on the Hong Kong Island side of things. In the next phase of the presentation and project, we sent out a public interest survey. Our public interest survey was divided into an on-site form and an online form. In our on-site form, as you can see in this picture, we developed our own sort of advertising stand where we set up a banner and some flags pretending that we were an actual water taxi type service. As people would approach us, we would ask them a variety of questions regarding water taxis, their usage, how they would use them, and pricing. So at various locations, we were stationed over the course of 5 days, and in that time, 133 people approached us with interest in water taxi type service, and of those, 91 were willing to answer our survey. One of our sponsors, Designing Hong Kong, then sent out our survey to their email list. And of their email list, 417 people responded back to us regarding information on a water taxi type service. So the first question we asked was a simple self-identification, whether they were tourists or locals. And in the vast majority of cases, 94%, most of our respondents were locals, indicating there was a strong internal demand already for water taxi type services in the city of Hong Kong. This is expected to grow as the waterfront increases its touristic capabilities as construction goes up forward. The next question we asked, regardless if they were a tourist or local, was if they had used a water taxi before, whether in or outside of Hong Kong. As you can see here, the purple, yellow, and red colors represent individuals who have used water taxi type services in or out of Hong Kong, or in both cases. And a slim majority of people who answered our survey responded in the affirmative that they had before used water taxi type services, meaning that a majority of people are familiar with the service. We next asked the all-important question, would they be willing to use a water taxi service? Do they want to use it? And again, in near vast majority of people indicated overwhelmingly, yes, they would like to use a water taxi type service. 89% of respondents responded yes. Finally, we asked them questions on pricing. So in this section, we asked them to draw a hypothetical route from point A to point B. We then measured that distance and then asked them to give us a hypothetical low ball price and a high ball price. Low prices are indicated in red and high prices are indicated in blue. We then pegged these prices based on the distance given and plotted it on the graph you see here. So as you can see, the majority of people prefer their water taxi trips to be in the 2 to 8 kilometer range, short, quick daily type trips from place to place. What the pricing points indicate is that there's a large spread even between low and high prices and within the low and high prices, indicating there's a large amount of demand for water taxi type services and a large variability which customers are willing to pay. There is an opportunity for price discovery on the part of a water taxi type operator. And in order for an entrepreneur to be able to properly set their own prices. Finally, we asked them how individuals would like to book this type of service, and we allowed people to select all the options they wanted. We had them choose between phone call, text messaging, mobile applications, on-site call boxes, or traditional physical hailing. To no surprise, the vast majority of people preferred mobile applications, a method similar to something along the lines of perhaps an Uber Boats. However, what is interesting is that The second most popular option was simply having the ability to call up a water taxi on demand, something which does not require extensive development or investment in order to do. You simply need to set up a proper phone line and essential service to handle the calls. Similarly, the traditional physical hailing, the easiest method for a person to gain business, received similar amounts of interest to the phone call, indicating that individuals are willing to use a water taxi service, even though the method of calling up your water taxi is low tech. Finally, we present a legal overview of the requirements necessary to operate marine vessels in a water taxi type service in the city of Hong Kong. Primarily, the three types of licensure required in order to operate a boat capable of harboring individuals for public transport is 1, the operating license, 2, the certificate of ownership, and 3, the ferry service ordinances license. The Marine Department of Hong Kong was responsible for doling out the operating license and certificate of ownership, while the Transport Department is who is responsible for controlling the ferry service ordinances license. Secondly, there is an issue of ship classification. There are 4 types of classes in the city of Hong Kong, but only 2 of which are allowed to transport passengers, Class 1 and Class 2. Class 1 categorization is less stringent than Class 2, and the difference between Class 1 and Class 2, as seen on this slide, is in the number of passengers they can carry. Class 2 carries 12 or more, while Class 1 carries less than 12. Finally, we took all this previous information and gathered together various stakeholders, ranging from our sponsors, Designing Hong Kong and the Harbor Business Forum, representing the business and urban interests of the city, to the government interests of the Harbor Unit, which is the Development Bureau, along with the Harborfront Commission and the Marine Department, along with the commercial interests of the boating industry, such as Motorboats and Tugboats Association and BMT Asia Pacific. We gathered these individuals together, presented before them the information you have seen, along with much more, in order to develop a comprehensive plan for what a water taxi type system would look like in the city of Hong Kong. The results of this workshop are what will follow. To begin with, what emerged is that there are 5 main pillars in order to develop a fully comprehensive water taxi system in the city of Hong Kong. These pillars are licensing, equipment, harbor infrastructure, pricing, booking, and marketing. Of these 5 pillars, my group and I took the major requirements of them and developed them into a phased approach, creating a timeline wherein an individual could begin their water taxi type service in a small startup type fashion and then progress from phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, growing in complexity and structure until you reach a fully professional and realized water taxi service and industry in the city of Hong Kong. Phase 1 begins mostly with what is available now, with what we identified in the first part of our project, what already exists, the individuals who are already operating as water taxis, and trying to slightly more organize and centralize them into a more formal business. Whereas phase 3 represents a medium to far distant future where we have specially designed water taxi boats, a centralized call system, application structure, and a full-scale commercial business structure. So to begin, with licensing, phase 1 exists as we have now. For example, charter services used by the launch services found in Victoria Harbor. You call ahead of time to a central dispatch location center, and the central dispatch location center simply charters a boat for a trip from point A to point B. As water taxi type services grow in popularity, you begin moving on to a Kaido on-demand service, which is similar to a ferry type service where fares are published regularly and officially, and you have regular routes from point A to point B. Finally, the next phase or final phase of phase 3 will be an amended license regime, allowing for individuals of any kind to take up a water taxi service, or for a new specific water taxi license system to be developed, which will allow anybody to operate a water taxi vehicle. The next pillar is equipment. Equipment refers to the boats and marine vessels that water taxi individuals will be using. So obviously in phase 1, we'll be simply co-opting the existing vessels that current entrepreneurs use in the city of Hong Kong. As water taxi services grow in popularity, vessels will become more fitted for purpose. And what fitted for purpose means is that certain regulations regarding perhaps safety, cleanliness standards, paint standards may be implemented in order to promote a sense of professionalism among water taxi entrepreneurs. Finally, the final phase of water taxi development represents a more corporate vision or a more professionalized vision, where a specially designed water taxi vessels will be used, and only specially designed water taxi vessels will be used, akin to perhaps the yellow cabs of New York, or the famous red cabs of Hong Kong, or the black cabs of London. Harbor infrastructure represents the pontoons and piers where water taxis will be moored, rest, and travel between during their regular services. Phase 1 represents existing public landing facilities which have been built onto the piers and waterfront of Hong Kong. Phase 2 is, as the water taxi service again grows more popular and more destinations will be desired, will be pontoon piers, quick ad hoc inflatable piers which can be deployed to test locations and determine whether or not places are viable. Finally, in phase 3, as the system becomes integrated into the daily fabric and culture of Hong Kong, the most popular places will have their current public landing facilities upgraded to be able to accommodate more ships and more locations, and future areas which have been A/B tested via pontoon piers will be further developed via additional public landing facilities. Finally, or not finally, we now have pricing, all important in developing a successful business. Currently, pricing in the city of Hong Kong is based on either bargain prices or quoted prices, which, as it stands, fits currently well in the decentralized nature of water taxi services. However, as a water taxi service evolves and grows more serious, published fares will eventually become a necessity, whether by meter or simply based on route. Quoted prices can still be maintained for special trips and services. However, ultimately, the final stage of pricing will be a dynamic pricing system, similar to what is used by applications such as Uber and Lyft, allowing total freedom of transportation locations from point A to point B to C to D to Z. How we book water taxi type services is perhaps the next most important pillar behind pricing. Currently, water taxi services are done either through physically hailing, flagging down a boat which you may believe to be a water taxi entrepreneur, and trying to haggle with him a price in order to transport yourself from point A to B. Or you may be able to be lucky enough to find up a person on the local yellow pages and give them a phone call and set up a price that way. After this, the next phase would be something more of a text messaging type system, where you'd be able to text perhaps say 123 boat to a central dispatch location, and they'd be able to notify you of potential boats in your area who'd be willing to pick you up, and published fares for the routes that they offer. Or we could even begin with development of a simple mobile application. Phase 3 represents a fully realized corporate system, whereby we either have a full Uber boat style mobile application, B, physical infrastructure in the form of call boxes, where you walk up and simply press a button and a water taxi driver on the other end will pick up and drive to your location, or Finally, perhaps even online booking, where you set up the place and time of when you want your water taxi to come pick you up and the destination of where you want to go. Finally, last but not least, we discuss marketing. So currently, water taxi type services are extremely marketed in the city of Hong Kong. They spread mostly by word of mouth and have to be tracked down and are known only by most locals. Flyers would be an upgrade from this, but still very low tech and a very embryonic stage. Moving on from flyers, if this plan were to be adopted, we would begin perhaps a concerted social media effort, perhaps a Twitter campaign, Facebook campaign, or local Chinese applications such as Baidu or Weibo. Following this, we could also have flags on boats advertising the fact that they are water taxis and are willing to pick up passengers for profit, rather than you having to guess which boat is or isn't a potential water taxi. Finally, we could also have official postings on piers, signage indicating that there are individuals in this area willing to pick you up, and publish fares on this posting. Phase 3, again, represents the final phase of a mature water taxi industry. There would be a full public website, brochures available in various hotels and touristic attractions, uniform paint and flags on the boats indicating at an instant eye glance that this is a water taxi and willing to take passengers, and public kiosks on piers selling potential water taxi trips and pleasure trips in the city of Hong Kong. To reiterate, we've just discussed the 5 main pillars of a water taxi type service: licensing, equipment, harbor infrastructure, pricing, booking, and marketing. And what we've presented is a 3-phased plan and approach in order to develop a water taxi system in the city of Hong Kong. Beginning first with phase 1, which attempts to slightly more centrally organize what already exists as individual boaters, taking advantage of economic situation, moving on to progressing to a final corporatized and professional stage of a water taxi service, akin to perhaps London cabs in London, red cabs in Hong Kong, or the yellow cabs in London or New York. Here is a full summary, and the final pitch is that while most of this will be handled by private industry, these 3 phases will require government involvement: licensing, harbor infrastructure, and marketing. So, as we can see here, the government would be able to help amend licensure regarding charter services and Kaido on-demand services to perhaps develop an amended license regime, help develop new locations in conjunction with business, identifying where new water taxi locations could be, to set up pontoon piers and eventually upgrade them into full-scale landing facilities, and finally to liberalize marketing laws to allow a water taxi service to have on-pier posting and public kiosks on the waterfront. Thank you. And do you have any questions?
Well, I'll start real quick and maybe go back one slide, and then we may drop you out of presentation mode. So fundamentally, the way you did this pitch was you were asking the government of Hong Kong, and so the 3 of us in this case are a proxy for the government, our interest in helping make the modifications circled in red. Is that how we should interpret it?
Well, one of you can interpret it that way. What happened specifically with this project is that we presented it once to interested business people who then bought into the idea, and then we presented it to the government, who then, well, I'll save that for the end.
Okay. Yeah, you don't have to tell us the result. So I will take the role of the government in this, and I'll let Danny and Peter take the role of business people.
Yeah, that's
so
fair.
I'll defer and say, business leaders, what questions do you have about your interest in investing in creating a water taxi business in Hong Kong?
So if I may, I think I caught pretty early on that was going to be the role in which what the audience was going to be. We were going to be some sort of municipality or transportation organization. So I might touch on where
Great.
you stand a little bit, Ethan.
Go for it.
What is the economic benefit of implementing something like this?
When you speak of economic benefit, do you mean for individuals, the city at large, the
In
government
any
tax
data
returns?
points?
In any data points? So the economic benefit of this is hopefully in order to act, well, let me go back to this map. So the current economic redevelopment plans in the city of Hong Kong, which already exists, the legislation has already been passed and there's massive construction. So there's large construction in here, this area, and this area, in order to redevelop the waterfront and make it into a commercial and touristy type hub, you know, developing restaurants, allowing sorts of pleasure buildings, hotels, these types of things, and sort of cultural centers to be built up. So as I introduced with, is that these places are being constructed. However, most public transportation or transportation in general in Hong Kong isn't waterfront based. So in order to say travel from this waterfront location.
Could I interrupt for a second?
Yes, ma'am.
Because you're actually not addressing Peter's question. So I'm going to ask you to step back, and what he was looking for, and this was going to be my question as well, is how is this a moneymaker? How am I going to make money? What is the total expected number of passengers over the course of a year? What is the total expected, just aggregate in terms of what's the expected revenue for the taxis? What is the revenue for the government in terms of licensing? Does this make good business sense to do? And what are other economic factors that would say, let's do it, even if there isn't a positive ROI?
I will begin with the first point in that the business does work because they already exist. The main point is that they exist particularly here in Point 5, the Sai Kung area, and Aberdeen Harbor. These areas are already waterfront developed locations with large waterfront activities. So as the city of Hong Kong develops more waterfront locations and waterfront activities, it will naturally occur that these locations will develop water taxi type systems. So the return already exists in other markets. It's logical to assume that these markets will transfer over. Now, even if we were to assume that, say, the ROA doesn't turn up, and say we were to ask the government for subsidies, the government of Hong Kong is willing to give subsidies. This is a spoiler alert. For a large variety of things, they're a very generous government. And the ROI from a social standpoint will be to connect the waterfront locations together in order to produce networking effects between the waterfront in order to increase commercial activity. Because currently what happens in the city of Hong Kong is that transport, you have to basically go far inland from one waterfront location to go back to another one. So you would be able to cut down transport time from, say, 20 to 30 minutes to just 5 minutes from tourist attraction to tourist attraction, which naturally would be something that a city government would be willing and wanting to do to help increase commerce. Does that answer your question?
Not necessarily, but I'll connect the dots and say yes. Another question that I had for you is when you were conducting the surveys of your potential target customer, what was the split between commercial use and kind of inner city exploration? Did you ask any questions whether they would use the water taxis for getting to work or going out and checking out the harbor on a nice day? What was the split there, or did you ask that question?
That was a question that was not asked specifically, no.
And Peter, what you were asking there, just so I'm clear, was how many of the people who are going to ride water taxis or were going to be passengers on them were commercial business versus tourists, essentially, or versus personal travel?
Yeah. So if you think of it, if someone's using it for business or
less
transportation, less price sensitive, and the frequency that they will take these water taxis is going to be much higher than, say, someone who's just going out to check out the Hong Kong waterfront. It's one use a month versus 20 uses every month.
Right.
So that was where I was trying to kind of.
Yeah, daily business travel. It's a little bit like how this is a variation of the airline business, right?
Mm-hmm.
So business travel, very different than recreational travel. Cool. Danny, I'm going to rotate through real quick. Do you have a key question you want to ask?
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to understand is kind of building on some of the things that Peter was asking, how many boats can be on the water at any one time, and how are they looking at managing traffic through that narrow strait? Because this is not something similar, truly, I mean, although it's analogous to, it's not truly similar to Uber or Lyft, where you can have, hundreds of cars on the freeway. You're really looking at a small area where there's a limited number of piers that boats can check into. And just from a logistics standpoint, what's the min max, or did you guys discuss that at all?
That's a question that we somewhat discussed with the Marine Department. So Victoria Harbor is actually, it's not that narrow. It's a relatively large strait. So, and these types of boats that we're discussing are pretty small in comparison. So that you can field a sizable fleet. They already exist. Like, these launches already exist in Hong Kong. They ply the waters of Victoria Harbor. They already are there. The purpose is to try and transform them from, say, more industrial type use into more touristic and commercial type use. So the number of boats would probably remain the same. The Marine Department does place restrictions on the number of boats, obviously, depending on various circumstances and times of the year. They will clear out the area during hurricane, or they call it typhoon season. But in general, because super large boats or cargo boats have been banned from Victoria Harbor, essentially, small boats have very much freedom to ply as they will in the waters of Victoria Harbor. So that isn't that much of a concern.
Okay, so this is really about efficiency of use of the existing boats and licenses rather than expanding access.
Yes, that's one way to look at it.
So I'll take the last question because I want to move on to giving feedback and keep our evening rolling. So if I were to ask a question from the role of the municipality, I think my question would be, which of the many things you've said I could do would be the most help? Like, I'm the government, I want to help. I'm from the government, and I'm here to help you. What will help most?
Liberalizing the license laws and issuing a specific water taxi license would help most.
Okay.
Because if you just develop a single licensure form under one department and one organizational structure, it will streamline the process and allow more people to get into the water taxi business. And it will allow people who are already in some type of boating business simply get an additional license for themselves to practice something on the side, similar to a driver's license.
Okay.
That'd be the number one thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's helpful. That was a very clear and concrete, specific answer, which I think is golden in a presentation like this. It comes down to what is the ask. The ask of the government. The primary ask is more of a is an easier license. While many things would help, that would help most. So what we'll do now is we've done 10 minutes of questions. I think it would be cool. I know Duke will tell us at the end what really happened. But what I'd be curious about is what feedback, Danny or Peter, would you give on the presentation? And I appreciate, by the way, chat, and we'll do this more with each subsequent presentation. You guys have been making observations. But Danny or Peter, what would you observe on the presentation and coach for presentation skills in the future?
Go ahead, Danny.
Oh gosh. I'm going to start out with one quick nit. Several of the slides are not compatible for people who are colorblind, and 10% of men and something like 3% of women worldwide are colorblind. So chances are, if you've got a decent number of people in the room, you've got at least one or two people who can't read your charts, or will have a very difficult time. So that's one, just from an accessibility standpoint. The other thing is I got bored. And I struggled to stay engaged with the presentation. I really, part of this is play or pretend, but how you describe the phased approach, it would have been more effective in a tighter presentation to do, here's everything for phase 1, here's everything for phase 2, here's everything for phase 3, rather than constantly going back and repeating, because I kept getting lost as to what mattered at what stage. Those are probably the two biggest pieces of feedback I give.
Thank you, Danny.
Yeah.
Peter.
I would say, you really set the scene in the first 30 seconds about the location and all of this stuff. And in my mind, I'm just kind of picturing these water taxis going around Hong Kong. But then when you came to the problem, there was no data there, which was hard. Why is this a problem? What are your indicators for this being a problem? And then kind of going into the solution. So that build up of, here's the problem, this is why it's a problem, and then kind of flowing into solution just wasn't there. I would also agree with Danny that phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 could very much be truncated. And then you've got a great voice. I must say, you should do radio, and your voice is awesome.
Thank you.
And
I've been told that before several times.
It's great. But I think your presentation felt very robotic, but given the audience and given the type of presentation that you're doing, maybe it makes a little bit more sense to be robotic and pitching to a municipality. And I think my last point here is thinking about it from a business sense, is that you have a marketplace and there is all of this fluff here. And if you can create a two-sided marketplace, you already have the vendors here. You bring the other side of the marketplace through a mobile app, that's going to solve it. And you don't have to deal with government. Government will have to deal with you. You can come to the table and say, hey, we're producing this much tax basis for you. Help us out and include us in some of these infrastructure products.
Well, mild spoiler, my sponsor tried that and the government shut him down. Yeah.
Well, let's hear the end then.
Yeah, go ahead.
Curious.
I'll give my feedback after that. Tell us the outcome. What?
Oh, the outcome of this project? 75% chance, 75% success, I'd call it. They actually, last year in May, they set up water taxi routes between 3 locations in the city of Hong Kong. Actually, you can Google it right now, water taxis in Hong Kong. I might be able to bring up the official news postings. So it did work. There is a government-sponsored water taxi in Hong Kong as of right now. You can go take it. It's advertised. It's a touristic attraction. Now, the downside is that it's not a full water taxi service, It's not on demand. It's a scheduled tour, and it's more of a tour boat type thing where you travel from point A to point B to point C and back to point A again. But the government accepted the idea. They took the proposal, they took what they could do with it, and they put out boats on the water, and they're sailing right now.
Government boats or private boats?
Government bidded it. The government
Contracted.
put out a contract, and a private company bid for the contract.
Okay. So, Duke, I appreciate you going first in this and bringing us a different. Duke's goal, as he expressed it to me, was to bring us a different style of presentation. He actually said he wanted to test the judges. So I don't know if Danny or Peter, you feel tested. But I admire that. It's got a good Twitch spin to it. The other presentations will be more classic pitches. Evaluating this as a pitch and feedback others could use or grow from, here's what I would say. Number one, Duke does have a great voice. It's a lot of people, and you'll probably see this later, Duke, in chat if you go back and look at it. And if you don't, here's your spoiler. Your voice feels like a old news anchor, like the radio news anchor, the like Edward R. Murrow, just the facts, and it's probably very solid for presenting data to a government or to a formal audience. For an investment pitch or trying to sell an idea to others, like the audience here, it was slow. This presentation was not lively enough, and you would have people zone out and start reading their phones a lot, I think, if they could get away with it wherever they were sitting. And so I would look, when you need to pitch something else, or I know a bit about your current job, you'd want to move faster and be more enthusiastic. Going to straight mechanics, I think there's a little more setup in the beginning, like a slide 1.5 here that talks about what the ask is going to be, or lets people know what their role in it is. So Peter and Danny and I were all kind of guessing, what is our role? So why that matters is throughout getting all the data, we don't know what it is we're going to be asked to consider. There's no agenda, if you will. Now, at a lot of, say, VC pitches, that's implied. The agenda is, I want you to give me money. But for me as an executive, I don't often know. And so I would have probably stopped someone on my team in the middle and been like, so where is this going? Like, what is this about? Not only because I wanted to know, but because I don't know how to evaluate all the data if I don't know where it's going. And then the other piece of feedback I would give for other presenters, this had great data. Peter pointed out some data gaps. But one thing this team did incredibly well is they went and talked to real people. They went to real places, boots on the ground. They found real existing businesses already doing this and found out their terms. They talked to real providers, real customers, real physical locations. Like, in that sense, it was well researched. And a lot of people make the mistake in business. Emmett Shear talked a lot about this in starting Twitch. The first several businesses he tried to start before Twitch, he forgot the step talk to customers. He was a really smart guy, and some of his friends were smart, and they just rolled their eyes up in their head, discussed what they thought were smart, cool ideas, and went and built them, only to find out nobody wanted them, because while they were smart and cool, it wasn't a real problem. Here, the positive, and I want to make sure when we do these evaluations, we also give the positive. The positive is real data. The negative is, I would say, or the opportunity for improvement is, I didn't end up feeling it. I didn't end up, there wasn't enough energy. And Duke, I know you wanted to present voice only. One of the challenges for that is then, to the degree that your pitch needs emotion, it has to come all verbally. You have to bring that energy through inflection and so on. And so while you do have a very strong voice, it was fairly monotone a lot of the time. And at no point did it really convey that you cared about the outcome. It was more just, hey, I'm telling you a lot of data.
If I may step in here,
Sure.
Duke, that pricing survey data was beautiful. Yes. And the way you worked through this slide was awesome. I just wish I had seen it with what the problem is, what the end solution is. But this by far was your best slide and some of your best presentations.
Totally. And the fact you had this data, really brilliant. So you could wrap a business case around this for sure. Yeah. Okay, cool. So we can wrap up. Duke, anything else you want to say about the final outcome, or any questions since you wanted to put us, the panelists, on the spot? Anything more you want to say?
The only thing I wanted to say is that even though obviously this pitch wasn't, perfect by your standards, it obviously it got
worked.
the job done.
Yeah.
It got the job done.
And that, by the way, counts. One of the most important things I would tell to everyone who's listening is, and thank you, Duke, it's totally fair to call us out on that. The great thing about pitching is you only need one yes. Now, in your case, you were pitching someone where you didn't have a lot of shots on goal. But depending on what industry you're in or what you're doing, if you have the chance to go to multiple sponsors, you only need one set of people to click with it. And if they can fund you, or if they can say yes to what you want, like let's say you're trying to get a sculpture installed in a town, right? Something that's not just money. Let's say you have the sculpture. You can pitch different parks. You can pitch different municipality pieces, different parts of the government. You can pitch different private buildings. Like, you only need one yes. You only need somebody who owns a building and who likes your flying pig to say, sure, I'd love to have a flying pig in front of my building. By the way, the flying pig is an actual symbol of Cincinnati. So I do not make this up. You have a great point there. Thank you. All right, cool. Well, I'll ask you to go ahead and relinquish screen.